The next section in Chapter 9 deals specifically with hurricanes. Fairly common here in the U.S., especially in the southeastern United States around the Caribbean Ocean there. From Texas all the way over to Florida. You actually have a graph on page 275 of your book showing several hurricanes that have gone through that area. But hurricanes are intense low-pressure systems that develop in the tropics, accompanied by winds between 74 to 200 miles per hour. If you live in the tropics, in those areas, hurricanes are very common. And the lower energy hurricanes, we'll talk about categorizing them later, really aren't too problematic. Again, we'll talk about some of those things at the end of this section. And it's almost a sport. I lived in Florida for 6 years, and they had, when it was hurricane season in the newspapers, they had how to track the hurricanes, which everything they were tracking, which things could develop into hurricanes, possible paths of hurricanes, and it was almost like a sport down there as far as predicting hurricanes. Everybody was kind of aware of it. I actually went through a rather weak hurricane. I think it was a Category 1 or 2 hurricane while I lived there. I actually went right over us. And we actually, at my college, we actually had a hurricane party in the hallway because we had to get away from windows. Between 74 to 200 miles per hour, the life of a hurricane a generic thing here, tropical cyclones, it's just a generic term. These are hurricanes and other rotating tropical low-pressure systems. Tropical cyclone, using that term cyclone, I think it was back from chapter 7 even, when we first talked about that term. Most hurricanes, they start off as a tropical disturbance. We have two definitions here. We'll get into both of those. One is the regions of low pressure that travel westward across the ocean with the trade winds. This is in both the Pacific and the Atlantic Ocean. In the United States, we're more familiar with the ones in the Atlantic Ocean because those are the ones that get on our press. The ones in the Pacific Ocean, because they deal with other countries usually, we just don't hear about them unless they're particularly bad. So the island nations in the West, they get hit by hurricanes on a regular basis. Again, the weaker ones, not as big of a deal as the more devastating larger ones. But yeah, they are in both areas. So just because we don't hear about them doesn't mean they don't exist. Let's see. Once the winds begin rotating, the tropical disturbance becomes a tropical cyclone. And I think I have a misprint there at number 4. Let's see. Yep, that should be, number 4 should be, should be a tropical depression. Number 4 should be a tropical depression. That is a misprint. The rotating winds of a tropical cyclone have a sustained speed of less than 39 miles per hour. It is a tropical depression. So make that change in your notes at number 4 there. It should be tropical depression, rotating winds of sustained speeds with less than 39 miles per hour. Once they reach that 39 miles per hour, it becomes number 5, a tropical storm. And that is usually when it's assigned a name. And they go through the alphabet. They start with A at the beginning of the storm season. And that's why there have been tropical storms, Alexander, Alvin, some other ones. They usually come up with Andrew. They usually come up with some kind of either all male names, all female names. Sometimes they go French or something. Because when I was in Florida, we had Hurricane George come through. It wasn't George, it was George. So, yeah, tropical, the storm, their rotating winds. So that's when they actually get their name, is when they become a tropical storm. A hurricane, they get labeled a hurricane when the winds reach 74 miles per hour. And that is the lowest speed of a hurricane. That is very strong and is strong enough to knock branches down, start causing what might be considered minor damage, and it's only considered minor because of what happens at later stages in a hurricane, which we'll actually look at the different categories of a hurricane. Yep, right here. The Saffir-Simpson Hurricane Wind Scale. This is the scale used to rank hurricanes. It is based mainly off the wind speeds, but you can see some other things added in here. So at at a Category 1 or a Cat 1, you might hear it abbreviated, winds are between 74 to 95 miles per hour. Damage is minimal, unanchored mobile homes, vegetation, and signs. Those are the things that start getting damaged there. Unless something goes through a window, we're not talking about much damage to cars even, or the regular houses. Storm surge, which is something we will talk about, just think of it as water rising for right now, is between 4 to 5 feet usually. Cat 2, 96 to 110 miles per hour. This is when we start seeing damage to roofs even. It says moderate. All mobile homes are having problems. Roofs can be ripped apart. Small craft, usually referring to boats and such. And this is really when we start seeing flooding. In most places that storm surge under the Cat 1 is not high enough to really cause flooding as we think of it. But Cat 2, that's when because it's 6 to 8 feet at this point. That's usually over the banks of most rivers. So this is where we start to see the flooding danger. Cat 3, which is around the average of hurricane categories that normally hit the southeast area. Yes, there have been some that have been much more devastating than that. We'll look at those in a little bit. But this is even extensive damage. Wind speeds of 111 to 130 miles per hour. Small buildings, low-lying roads get cut off, usually because of flooding. Because look at the storm surge on this one. Again, remember, that's rising water. 9 to 12 feet. That's taller than twice of most of you. So, the Cat 4. Cat 4s and 5, not as common. They do happen, but they're just not as common. Cat 4 sustained winds, 131 to 155. We start seeing extreme damage. Roofs are destroyed. Healthy trees knocked down. Roads completely cut off. Mobile homes are pretty much destroyed. Beach homes getting flooded. Storm surge 13 to 18 feet. Cat 5 is more than 155 miles per hour. Damage is considered catastrophic. Most buildings destroyed, vegetation destroyed, major roads cut off, even major roads destroyed because that storm surge, homes were flooded, is greater than 18 feet. And really starting even earlier in probably the Cat 2, even in the Cat 1, those storm surges are going to start carrying mud. And the water by itself is damaging. Water with mud is even more so. I remember seeing some pictures from the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina, and you just saw these were houses that were devastatingly flooded, and you saw mud lines in the rooms of several feet off the ground, 4 or 5 feet up the walls. Just mud were in these rooms. I saw some cars that were practically buried in mud. The only reason you knew they were cars is you could still see the roof of them. So, yeah, it gets really, really bad, especially the higher that storm surge. We'll talk more about that in just a little bit. Here we see a hurricane structure. You have the eye of the hurricane, which is the center of the hurricane. It is typified, we usually call it calm, but that's because there's just no rain going on. There can still be some high winds in there, going upwards, spiraling upwards. You see it's also carrying some of that moisture up, spreading out in that cirrus cloud at the top there. But we do call it calm because you can see the sun through it. There's no clouds blocking your view. There's no rain in the center, but you still might have those winds. The eye wall is immediately around the eye, hence the name eye wall, and it is a cylinder of thick, whirling clouds and rain that surround the eye. So this is a pretty nasty area as far as winds and rain go. And then you also, and the term's going to be on the next page, but I want to point it out while we have the picture up here. You also have these rain bands, which are just these lines of clouds that are rotating around the eye, and you get these distinct rainfall from it. You're standing there and a thick wall of rain comes over you really fast pretty much, and then it lightens up and then another thick wall of rain could come over you. It kind of depends on where you are in relation to the eye. But yeah, so we have those rain bands, and like I said, the term is going to be on the next slide here. Bing, right there at the top of the page. Rain bands, long, narrow lines of thunderstorms that rotate around the eye. Hurricane dangers. We kind of talked about this a little bit already with the Saffir-Simpson hurricane scale. But just to point this out, one of the most destructive forces of a hurricane is the wind. That wind gets up to high speed, it starts kicking things around, and it gets pretty damaging. Even a small branch moving at 130 miles an hour is going to destroy things. You have some pictures in your book about some of the damage throughout the pages there that hurricanes can do. I saw a picture somewhere. I don't remember where I saw the picture now. But it was of a plastic bucket, just like a 5-gallon bucket you might find in a home, pushed through a piece of plywood as a result of hurricane forces. The storm surge, elevated water level caused by a hurricane's winds pushing water ahead of the storm. So that is what the storm surge is. And the stronger the hurricane, the higher that storm surge is going to be. This is really what causes a lot of the really destructive damage. Yes, the wind is dangerous. Things getting blown around by the wind cause damage. But the high price in life, human life, as well as in the fixing up afterwards, comes from the storm surge carrying mud and other gunk into areas. The flooding after Hurricane Katrina, well, actually during Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans, some of the worst that this country has ever seen. And it was really devastating. You saw water levels up to roof lines. I remember seeing footage of Coast Guard people, Coast Guard, National Guard, pretty much anybody who could get out there after the hurricane had gone through, still pretty bad. The flooding was still going on. They hadn't gotten the flooding under control. Descending onto roofs and cutting a hole into a roof to get people out because they went up to the attics to escape the flooding that was going on in their area. It also doesn't help the fact that a lot of New Orleans is actually below sea level. It's protected by what are called levees and keeps the water at bay. And these levees were really rated for Category 3 hurricanes, again, which were kind of the norm before Hurricane Katrina came through. And if I understand correctly, there was talk about upgrading the levees, but no, it wasn't considered a immediate need, simply because up until then the levees had withstood the problem. Now, when Hurricane Katrina went through, it destroyed several of the levees, and they had to rebuild those, and I'm sure have rebuilt them to a better structure, well, just better now to withstand higher levels of hurricanes. So hurricanes often cause significant inland flooding. And if you look in your books, you see several pictures of storm surge flooding. So yeah, just taking out cars, taking out roads. Because keep in mind, it only takes 3 inches of moving water to actually move a car. And when a hurricane comes through, we're talking in terms of feet. So cars get destroyed. Most places that are prone to hurricane, they do have hurricane evacuation routes, which usually lead away from the coast to higher ground to keep people safe. So, again, places that are used to hurricanes, they have ways of dealing with it, some better than others. Like I said, New Orleans had significant problems because they were below sea level. The levees broke as a result of the hurricane, and massive flooding, much greater than they were anticipating, happened and caused a lot of devastation down there. That's actually still being cleaned up to this day. So, go ahead and answer the science video question for section 9.2, and I will see you next time, where we will talk about measuring and forecasting weather, so looking at some of those instruments.